Hi, friends. We're going live. I want to talk today again about the COVID-19 thing, and I know a lot of the debate on this is starting to sound like a broken record. I hope I can add something new with this piece. And I want to begin with the premise that in a republic, it doesn't just matter what we do. How we do it matters a lot. And so we've heard a lot of debate about, should we have crashed the economy to stop this disease? And we've heard a lot of debate about, whether it would be better to shelter in place, whether we need more restrictions, less restrictions, no restrictions. How should we open the economy? Is there a middle path? We can debate those issues until the cows come home, and we'll probably never completely agree. But I want to make the point that in a republic, like I said, it's not just a matter of what we do, it's how we do it. In this country, our government puts people to death. The various states do. But before that happens, those people have had an opportunity to tell their story to a jury of their fellow citizens. They've had a chance to cross-examine the witnesses brought forward by the prosecution. They've had a chance to explain alternative theories and otherwise have due process of law. They had the right to an attorney. They had the right to appeal a conviction to a higher court. Why? Because how we go about putting someone to death and depriving them of their life matters. Just take them out and shoot them is Nazi Germany. It's the Soviet Union. It's Uganda under Idi Amin. That's not how we do things in a constitutional republic. Our way is more cumbersome. But it's also more honoring of liberty and human dignity. So the founders of our republic provided that people could have their freedom taken away without trial during times of crisis by suspending the writ of habeas corpus. And then they could be imprisoned without trial. But it had to be done with a vote of Congress. The last time that happened was during the Civil War, when President Roosevelt rounded up 120,000 Japanese Americans, 80,000 of whom were actually born here and had lived their entire lives here in the United States, and put them in prison camps during World War II. They received no trial, no right to an attorney, no due process of law. They were rounded up and put in a camp by virtue of their race. Why? Because people were afraid. And when people are afraid, they ask for a Leviathan to protect them. And that's how the most brutal tyrannies in history are created. So I need you to ask yourself, has anyone voted for all these restrictions we're being placed under? No. Governors are exercising emergency powers and ruling by decree. Now, I'm not suggesting that we have governors saying take people out and shoot them. They're not doing that as far as I know. The point isn't what measures are being taken, it's how they're being taken. There was a case after Japanese Americans were rounded up called Korematsu. Fred Korematsu refused to report to a relocation camp and wanted to stay with his Italian-American girlfriend in California. Now, think about the irony of this. His girlfriend was Italian-American. She was not confined to a relocation camp, even though we were at that time at war with Italy. But Korematsu, because he was Japanese and we were at war with Japan, and by the way, he was born in the United States. He was a Japanese-American. I don't know if he'd ever even been to Japan. But he was of Japanese descent, and the government assumed that Fred Korematsu, might be disloyal. And so they ordered him to a relocation camp. He refused to go, and he was arrested, tried, and convicted. This case went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And the court found that because of the exigencies of war and the danger of a West Coast invasion by the Japanese Empire, that these measures were justified. Justice Robert Jackson dissented in what I think was one of the more brilliant dissents written. And one of the things he said, quote, "But the law which this prisoner is convicted of disregarding is not found in an act of Congress, but in a military order. Neither the act of Congress nor the executive order of the President, nor both together, would afford a basis for this conviction. It rests on the orders of General DeWitt. And it is said that if the military commander had reasonable military grounds for promulgating the orders, they are constitutional and become law, and the court is required to enforce them. There are several reasons why I cannot subscribe to this doctrine. It would be impracticable and dangerous idealism to expect or insist that each specific military command in an area of probable operations will conform to conventional tests of constitutionality. When an area is so beset that it must be put under military control at all, the paramount consideration is that its measures be successful rather than legal. The armed services must protect a society, not merely its constitution. The very essence of the military job is to marshal physical force, to remove every obstacle to its effectiveness, to give it every strategic advantage. Defense measures will not, and often should not, be held within the limits that bind civil authority in peace. No court can require such a commander in such circumstances to act as a reasonable man. He may be unreasonably cautious and exacting, perhaps he should be, but a commander in temporarily focusing the life of a community on defense is carrying out a military program. He is not making law in the sense the courts know the term. He issues orders, and they may have a certain authority as military commands, although they may be very bad as constitutional law. But if we cannot confine military expedience by the Constitution, neither would I distort the Constitution to approve all that the military may deem expedient." So he's saying sometimes the military, in defending civilization, is going to have to take measures that are unconstitutional. And I think most of us understand that if our country was invaded, there would be a need to do whatever was necessary. Destroy private property, take prisoners without, trial. We would suspend the writ of habeas corpus to do that. Congress would suspend the writ, I would hope. However, Justice Jackson continues, "A military order, however constitutional, is not apt to last longer than the military emergency. Even during that period, a successful commander may revoke it all. But once a judicial opinion rationalizes such an order to show that it conforms to the Constitution, or rather rationalize the Constitution to show that the Constitution sanctions such an order, the court for all time has validated the principle of racial discrimination in criminal procedure and of transplanting American citizens. The principle then lies about like a loaded weapon, ready for the hand of any authority that can bring forward a plausible claim of an urgent need. Every repetition embeds that principle more deeply in our law and thinking and expands to new purposes." A military commander may overstep the bounds of constitutionality. It is an incident. But if we review and approve, that passing incident becomes the doctrine of the Constitution. There it has generative power of its own, and all that it creates will be in its own image. Nothing better illustrates this danger than does the court's opinion in this case. So in plain English, Justice Jackson was saying, sometimes the military in defending civilization is going to have to do stuff that's unconstitutional. if we get invaded. And hopefully we would convene Congress at the first possible opportunity, and they would suspend the writ of habeas corpus to do it in a constitutionally proper manner. But the understanding is that all due process of law and so forth, goes out the window when you're under an existential threat. I think most Americans understand that. But he says we as the Supreme Court cannot engage in justifying that with legal rationale. That if we do, the principle we're setting lies about like a loaded weapon, as he said, ready for the hand of any authority that can bring forth a plausible claim of an urgent need. And he said people will take any power you give them and expand it, find new applications for it, and, as he put it, embed that principle more deeply in our law and thinking and expand to new purposes. I have deep concerns about this. Now, I don't know of any case proceeding to the Supreme Court about all these restrictions under COVID-19. I do see a big concern, though, that without legislative authority, we've got governors running around making executive orders, making law, and people aren't questioning whether they have the constitutional authority to do it. They're exercising emergency powers in a situation where emergency powers really haven't gone before. I want to say, incidentally, that not a single Japanese American, not one, was found to have done a disloyal act during World War II. An act of espionage or treason or spying, anything. 120,000 were deprived of liberty based on their race. As I said, 80,000 of those were born in the United States. They were as American as you or me. Now, I know there's no, as far as I know, racial component to, or anybody being targeted because of race under the current restrictions. I know that. But the principle is that when we decide to suspend the Constitution and to have the executive start making law, that should be for very brief emergencies, and we should convene legislatures and have the people's representatives pass stuff. And there's no effort that I can see undertaken in the present COVID-19 crisis to do that. And I'm telling you, when you breach those lines and those barriers that are there to protect our freedom, as Justice Jackson talked about, when you cast aside the Constitution cavalierly, the principle then lies about like a loaded weapon, ready for the hand of any authority that can bring forth a plausible claim of an urgent need. What is this? Why are governors acting without legislatures in the COVID-19 crisis? It's a plausible claim of an urgent need. And every time we repeat this, every time executives seize power in order to address a crisis, we expand and embed the principle more deeply into our law and thinking. And what will be the next crisis that an executive will use to seize more and more power to themselves? I'm telling you, it will be easier next time and the next. It will find new applications and new ways of harming liberty. If you don't think this is real, read our history. When Germany was defeated, their economy was in shambles. They were ripe for a Leviathan to rise up and say, I'm going to restore our greatness. I'm going to protect you. Look throughout moments, even in our own history, where President Roosevelt is beloved by historians and by a lot of Americans. But he messed up. He rounded up 120,000 loyal Americans and put them in prison camps because they were Japanese, racially. And why did he do it? Because people were scared. When people are scared, they'll tolerate a lot more abuses of their freedom. And one of the chief abuses of their freedom, if you look at the Declaration of Independence, one of the chief abuses of freedom that people were worried about, the king was dissolving legislative assemblies and refusing to call new ones. The king was imposing taxes without representation. You remember taxation without representation is tyranny? Okay. When government starts forming laws without votes of the people's elected representatives, this is serious business, folks. Now, this COVID-19 crisis has been going on for over a month. Why have the governors of the respective states that are seizing power and making emergency orders and declaring states of emergency and martial law and things like that, why are they not convening their legislatures to ratify the things that they've done if these are necessary? As I began, I'm going to end. In a republic, it doesn't just matter what we do. It matters how we do it. We can put people to death. We can put people in prison. We can fine people and deprive them of their property. But how we do it matters. Due process of law matters. And how we handle a public crisis matters too. And I want to see it done in a constitutionally appropriate way. So thank you for listening. I hope you'll ponder this. Communicate with your elected representatives. Let them know you want to see the people have a voice in this process. So thanks again for listening, and I hope that this was informative for you.